Welcome to another Straight Up Tuesday tip. I'm 𝗤𝘃𝗀𝗀𝗀. With me as always is Mark Ainley. With us for, I believe, the 6th or 7th time, Perry Farella. Perry, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're excited. I think it's the first time we've had you since you've made the move over to First Community Mortgage. And we're going to have you on again to talk about some of the new products over there. But today, Perry, we wanted to get you back on. You recently wrote a blog, 5 strategies to navigate a high interest rate, low inventory environment. I thought it'd be something great for our listeners, so we'll link to that in the show notes. I guess for our listeners, can you give us, those 5 strategies that you mentioned, and then I want you to dive deep into probably the one that you feel is the most important in today's environment.
Okay, sure. So at a high level, the 5 strategies are: buy a distressed property with a renovation loan. Second one is use a temporary buy down for 1, 2, or 3 years to lower your payment to a more affordable point for you. Third one, if you're a move up or a move down buyer and you've got a 3% mortgage you don't want to get rid of, go ahead and be an unexpected landlord and keep it. The fourth one, go ahead and buy now and then refi later when we have lower interest rates, because there is a cost to waiting. And the last and tried and true one is just have seller paid closing costs to the max. Use the seller paid closing costs to buy down the interest rate for the whole term of the loan.
All right. So out of everything you just listed, what do you feel is the most important one to keep in mind in today's environment?
Today's environment, what I see with my clients is that if they can find a distressed property or an old property, like on an estate sale, that the heirs or the sellers don't want to clean it up, they don't want to make it presentable, they just want their money, you can usually buy those properties rather than being outbid by many others. Usually buy them below list price because they don't show well, or they're just really junky, outdated. But you buy in the neighborhood or the location that you want, that has the amenities that you want, and then you use a renovation loan, which is one loan with all the dollars to purchase plus all the dollars to renovate. And then you bring it up to current standards, enjoy living in it right away, and enjoy the increase in equity you get. That's probably the most important one, and that can be done on single family houses, condos, 2 to 4 unit properties, even investment properties.
All right. So, Perry, do you have an example of a recent client who's done this and done it successfully? Because there's obviously, it sounds so easy, but it's still tricky, right? There's still a lot of hoops to get through.
Yeah, there is. So, the way a renovation loan might work is that you find a particular property, let's say it's an old house that's really junky and no one's touched it or cleaned it, and it's totally unappealing. You can't, as a realtor, advertise it. You can't do open houses. You can't show pictures. So as a buyer, I might look for a house like that in the neighborhood that I might want. One of my clients did that with a single family house, an old Chicago bungalow actually, and added the dollars they needed to bring it up to current standards, which includes, opening up the floor plan, opening up the kitchen to the dining room, all that kind of thing that people like today. You can do that within the footprint of an old house. So you can buy a property, let's say for, in this case, I think the property sold for $200,000 as an example, and the borrower added another $100,000 to do some repairs and bring it up to contemporary standards. And then that house has an after renovated value that's really key. That's how these loans are approved. We don't care what you pay for it, we care what you do to it, and that the dollars that you're putting into it come back out as an after renovated value. So an after renovated value was, I think in this case, $350,000, some $50,000 more than the transaction. Buying for $200,000, adding $100,000 to renovate, that's $300,000. They can buy with as little as 3.5% down off the $300,000, but the after renovated value was found to be $350,000. Given the sales comps in that location on other houses that had already been renovated. So that's an example of buying the house and seeing the vision of what it could be, as opposed to going down the street, finding that pristine house that everyone's overbidding on, that you might have had to pay far more than $350,000 because it's so appealing. And that's what we're seeing in today's market, is that there is a low inventory problem because 70% of the people that have mortgages have a mortgage rate of 4% or less. That's 70% of houses. So that's causing a problem in the market. We're not getting the move down or the move up people selling those properties. So there's a low inventory problem in almost every market. I myself have a 3% mortgage. I'm never going to sell my house. I'm never going to get rid of that 3% mortgage. Today, I would more than double that mortgage if I had to get the same one. It's much more financially wise for me to retain that house when I move on, turn it over to tenants. I'll get positive cash flow and they'll pay my 3% mortgage off for me. And I'll just let the equity accumulate. A lot of people are making that same decision. That's why there's a low inventory problem. And there's also a high interest rate problem because we're coming off of the COVID period when rates were artificially low. Now they had to move up higher to remove the inflation that we've seen. So interest rates are more than double what they were just 2 or 3 years ago. So there's a lot of people that don't want to give that up or they can't afford to. So that's why there's low inventory. So one of the solutions for that is to find the most undesirable houses that people are passing on and then go ahead and change them and make them into what you want that house to be. And then later, you can always go ahead and refinance it, but it's cheaper to acquire the house now, put the money into it, realize the after renovated value, use it every day. Then later in a year from now, when interest rates are lower, you can always refinance and lower your monthly costs. So those are a couple of my strategies that you can use together. Buy and renovate now, then do the refi later, get the after renovated value today, and enjoy the house today for what it is that you want.
Remember, those of you that want to hold on to that low interest rate and rent it out but don't want to deal with it, you can hire a property manager. So that was a shameless plug there for myself. But Perry, any advice you give people when they're coming into this loan process when it comes to calculating the ARV? Sometimes people undershoot it where they think it's not realistic, or sometimes they overshoot it where it ends up being a deal that dies because it doesn't make sense.
Well, what we've seen is that if you're realistic about your improvements and the costs, and we look up front to see what we can find in sales comps that have sold in the last 6 to 12 months in that area, we can usually forecast all this up front. But as a check and a balance on our process, we send an appraiser in. The appraiser gets the written contractor's write-up with all the details of what's to be done and the exact cost and how the house will end up later, whether you're adding square footage, adding more bedrooms and bathrooms, all that stuff can affect after renovated value. Then the appraiser will give us that after renovated value based on finding another house or several houses in that area that have sold or even a couple active listings. So what we like to do with our clients is before they even go down that road, we like to explore with their realtor what are the expected sales comps that would be comparable in square footage to the house that you're going to buy and you're going to put in all of this work on, so that we can project that up front, because you don't want deals to die because after renovated value didn't come out. And of course, we can't have houses that never get finished either with these kinds of loans. So the key is making sure that we all know what the sales comps are before we even start, and then have reasonable expectations about how much money you can put in based on that.
Yeah, no, from someone who's done a decent amount of flips, it's hard to retreat once if you messed up that ARV, right? The three inputs are your ARV, the amount of rehab, and holding time. If you miss the boat on any three of those, like, you're going to have issues on the back end. That profitability you thought was going to be there is going to be highly minimized. So, Perry, we're one last question here and we'll wrap. But, you know, a lot of people want to get started. They're looking in the game. They say, okay, I'll do that. I'll do a little bit of rehab. They just have no idea how to estimate the rehab, right? Like, they don't know, like, is this 30K? Is this 60K? Is this 90K? You know, what is your advice to them if they come to you and say, hey, I like this program. You know, we're down to take some risk and build some equity by doing some work. We just don't know where to get started, though.
One of the guideposts that we often use is cost per square footage. So if you're going to, in today's environment, if you're going to do a significant rehab, you really have to figure out that it's going to be somewhere between $90 and $120 per square foot, typically in the Chicago market, depending on what you're doing. So that would be one guidepost or one metric that you could use. And there are a few websites available that you can use to forecast costs if you're concerned about what the costs are going to be before you speak to your contractors. But the ultimate authority is to have 2 or 3 different contractors walk through, describe exactly what you want to do, even down to the level of finishes that you want. Number of can lights, do you want quartz, do you want granite countertops, do you want laminate? Is it your personal dream house, or is it a house that you're going to fix and flip, or a house that you're going to lease out to tenants? All of that is going to factor into what the cost you have to put into the house and to what the ARV is ultimately going to be, which is really dictated by what are the houses in the area that already have been renovated or updated, what have they been selling for. So those are some of the metrics that I use typically with my clients when they ask these questions. Our loans are designed for people who have no experience whatsoever. They may never do this again in their lives, but we want them to have a successful experience. So what we can do is we can say, hey, consider $90 to $120 a square foot. Is that within your budget? Is that within what we can approve you for on the mortgage size? And if it's not, then we have to look for a house that is selling at a lower price.
Got it. I like having those goalposts. Give them something to go off of before they start getting everyone through the door. Mark, anything else before we wrap?
No, I'll just recap those 5 things one more time, and we will link that we'll link that blog you wrote, which I thought was awesome, to the show notes, and then we'll wrap.
Okay, the 5 tips then in a high interest rate, low inventory environment are: number 1, consider the renovation loan we spoke about. A temporary rate buy down is paid by a seller closing cost credit. You can buy your rate down 2% for 1 year, 1% for the next year. Then the 3rd year, you go back to the original rate. You can become an unexpected landlord if you have a house with a super low interest rate like I do and you don't want to sell it. Go ahead and try being a landlord. Then you can buy the new house with only a 3.5% or 5% down payment. You don't need 20% down to buy a house. You could buy the house now and do a refinance later using today's interest rates out of the belief that appreciation is going to be your friend. Or the last of the 5 is the seller paid closing costs. You can get anywhere from 3 to 9% of the sale price back from a seller to pay all closing costs, which could also include buying the interest rate and the mortgage down for the entire term of the loan if you want.
Good stuff. All right, Chicago Fact. Mark, who are we playing for?
All right, we're paying for Grant Manning out of Park Ridge. Bought a T-shirt. So thank you, Grant. We're going to play for a $50 gift card brought to you today by Perry himself, FCM Loans, First Community Mortgage. And if myself or Perry get this right, Grant, then you'll get a $50 gift card.
All right. Let's get this for you up in my neck of the woods. So our question today, our listeners probably don't know this, but Perry and I run into each other at this Starbucks over at Irving, Lincoln, and Damon, I don't know, like once a month. I got a couple projects over there. Perry, I think that's like your home turf, your office away from home. So we've seen each other a couple times over there. So today's question, how many Starbucks are there within the city limits of Chicago? And your options are 60, 120, 180, 250. 60, 120, 180, 250. How many Starbucks within the city limits of Chicago?
I'm going to go with 180.
All right. Perry, what are you thinking?
What were my options again?
60, 120, 180, or 250?
I'm going to go with 60.
All right. Mark, you got it. 180.
Bam. All right. Awesome.
Look at you.
I knew there was 150.
What was the logic behind there? Were you like, hey, 2 per name? Like, what was the thought process?
No, my thought process, I knew there was like 150 like 10 years ago. And I'm like, I know they didn't go crazy. I know they closed a couple, but I know they didn't go down 30. So that was just, I heard something randomly, a random fact many years ago that I based that on. So that's it.
Nice work.
But what I wanted to ask you was, does that count all the little satellite ones that are in the hotels, that are in the Dominics?
Yeah, the ones
in
Target.
Stuff.
Does that count?
Yeah. So I think that does. So, all right, awesome. Well, Grant, you got yourself a $50 gift card brought to you by Perry and FCM Loans. So, Perry, thanks for coming on. Tom, thank you. Listeners, check out Build Your Team. Tons of people that we have worked with, dealt with, been successful with on our own real estate investing that we now want to make sure that we're sharing with our audience. So we get thousands of downloads here a month. And I know you guys are always looking for resources, and we built this Build Your Team page out for that reason. So check it out. Perry, thank you for coming on. We still actually owe you your reward from being a 5-timer. I still have that in my car. I'm waiting to run into you one day at Starbucks, I guess.
All right.
Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, we'll see you Thursday.
Thanks all.